anyone listening to this, if you have ever had that experience of hearing a story that resonated with you, you feel resonance in your body. Because the thing is, our heart recognizes our true capabilities while fear whispers those doubts. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast. I'm Christina, Caro, licensed clinical psychologist.
And I'm Lynskey, a leadership and self-trust coach.
We would like to just thank everyone who subscribed, reach out to share your comments, and helped us to grow the channel. You have kept us inspired and motivated to keep creating content, and we hope that we can help you navigate your human journey with grace, humor, curiosity, and courage, because that has been our mission since the beginning. So today, we want to honor our anniversary by returning to our original topic on imposter syndrome. But this time, it's from the perspective of our current exploration of courage.
So for those of you who struggle with imposter syndrome and ever wondered, how do you manage to do something brave while feeling like a complete imposter? If you've been following the channel, you'll know that imposter syndrome has been something that I've been wrestling with for many, many years. I thought that I overcome it, but I'm realizing it kind of every once in a while shows up. And so when Christina and I are talking about exploring this topic, I felt like there was a connection to imposter syndrome, but I just couldn't put my finger on it. And so Christina, in her fashion that she always does, just Karen, every time you felt the fear of imposter syndrome and still took action, you had courage.
Yeah, that was like a aha moment. And then I get to watch Karen like, oh, connect all the dots.
Yes, I did do that. Like, oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I remember saying,
What do you mean? What do you mean? You do it all the time. So I think we need to start, in case people are new to the podcast, let's just go over real briefly what imposter syndrome is all about. And then we'll jump into how we are applying our understanding of courage, which our definition is to take action with your whole heart in the face of fear, and how this is essential to overcoming or at least managing imposter syndrome.
But before we start, we want to ask you to remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you know when our next episode is posted.
Thanks, guys. So, okay, imposter syndrome. It's defined as a persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own effort or skills. So it causes people to feel like they're a fraud or an imposter in whatever the role is that they find themselves, whether it's professional, but it could also be personal. I've had clients who were new parents and they felt like they didn't know what they were doing and they were imposters. People who are neurodivergent who develop masking will often say that they feel like they're a fraud. So it can be in many different settings, but it's this pervasive sense that in general, if you look at the literature, it's a little more specific to focusing on success that's not deserved, but we have approached it from a bit of a broader perspective, that it's anytime like you don't feel that whatever it is that you're engaged with, that you deserve to be there, that you feel like you're a fraud or that you're going to be found out at any moment.
Yeah, and for me, it always felt like I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. I never felt like I was ever good enough. I wasn't competent enough, even though I even had the education and the experience. I just felt like a fraud, and that was what was interesting about imposter syndrome for me.
Well, imposter syndrome, it can affect people of really all genders, all ages, education background, but it's definitely more common in certain groups. So, for example, people who are underrepresented. So, if you are from a racial, ethnic, sexual, or gender minority, or if you are in another underrepresented group, there's a persistent feeling of not really belonging when you're trying to engage in your job and your role. Students, and I've ran across this when I was in undergrad, but I went to a very elite undergrad school, and there's a lot of students who went to prep school, went to, really top high schools, and I was just a middle class kid. And there was definitely that feeling of, I don't think I really belong here. And this was in the 80s when it was how to dress preppy. And I don't know if you remember that, Karen,
I do
but
remember that.
yeah, I was like, "Oh, man, I don't fit in here. What am I doing here?" And so if you're different socioeconomic class, maybe you're the first one in your family to go to college and you don't quite feel that, "Do I belong here?" Imposter syndrome really hits high achievers, and it's people who are experts, highly skilled, highly educated, even published, but for some reason, they don't believe that their talent is valid or legitimate. And they experience something we call a competence confidence gap. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then there's just people who feel different. As I mentioned, if people who are neurodivergent, who may have developed masking as a coping strategy, or if you're a woman in a male dominated field, you may just feel different and maybe feel that, they're not going to believe I really belong here. And do I really belong here? So imposter syndrome isn't just about other people thinking you don't belong. It's really your own fear
Yeah.
that you don't belong or you're undeserving, and that an imagination that other people are thinking the same thing, that you don't belong, that you haven't earned it. So it's a double whammy.
Yeah, you're like bringing me up all this like it's like, oh my gosh. When you're talking about that confidence gap, man, that was really when I was getting that tense shoulder saying, oh, that was so much me because I realized I couldn't accept any recognition that came my way. No recognition. I always said it was the other team members minimizing and thinking it had nothing to do. And every success felt kind of borrowed. Like every achievement felt like it was just a lucky break that I somehow stumbled upon rather than earned or some. It was because I was with Christina. That's why, it was so great. I mean, I won awards even at Sloan at MBA school at MIT Sloan strategy competition. I mentioned this earlier and I said, oh, it was my partner, even though I had wrote my own section, right? But we won this consulting award. And it's just funny because I couldn't believe that I actually achieved and deserved the success, right? So it just kept feeling like instead of being proud, I just felt like I was hiding behind a facade. And so I think that was what was so sad about feeling like it's imposter. That imposter syndrome was just kind of sad. So I'm kind of glad I'm over it, although at times it still shows up, as you know personally. Then you'll write me back down and say, Karen, do you recognize? But that's part of the journey that I'm on. So
Yeah. Yeah. And in our first episode, we talked about some of these stress factors that
oh yeah.
arise out of it. There can be just this anxiety because of fear of being found out. You can see people try to compensate through perfectionism and over preparing. There could be a difficulty even when they get kudos. There's a difficulty internalizing it
Mhm.
into something. It's like, oh, it's fleeting, or they just didn't know. Like if they really knew, they wouldn't be giving me this award or this acknowledgement. And then if they do succeed in something like you just said, a tendency to attribute it to some external factors. When we addressed it in our first 4 episodes, what we looked at was challenging some of the quick tips that I found that people were talking about in terms of dealing with imposter syndrome, that I felt overly emphasized relying on external validation. So our very first episode was called Avoiding the External Validation Trap.
Mhm. Mhm.
And what we wanted to do was focus on much more enduring strategies to approach this, which included developing a genuine identity based on values and authenticity. And we'll connect that more to courage in a moment, cultivating curiosity, humor, and humility, and then
Mhm.
embracing mistakes and growth.
Yeah.
But what is courage? So where does courage fall in all of this?
So when we talked about courage, we were saying that it was taking action with your whole heart in the face of fear.
Right. And then as compared to fearlessness, which is
Yes.
to be without fear, courage is to be with fear,
Mhm.
but to act anyway, to try to come from that authentic place. One of the issues we see with imposter syndrome, and Karen, maybe you relate to this, it's like a partial engagement or a holding back to avoid being found out. Maybe not speaking up in a meeting, or maybe not making it known even that I've heard this with academics, being reluctant to publish. It's never polished enough. And if I publish it and it's not perfect, then they're going to find out. So then they're even holding back material that it probably is ready for publishing, but they hold back. So courage is necessary to bring our whole heart into that situation so we can fully lean in and show ourselves. And how this definition of courage manifests, it's like, Karen, like, wouldn't you say that it's true that there's a voice in your head that sows doubt about your capabilities? But like when I put a spotlight on your strengths and say, Karen, this is your strength, right? Like and I bring you back to actual experiences I know you've had, like, this is your gift, right? You know this. And then what happens? Like, what do you normally say to me?
You're so right. It's kind of like I had this release, like, oh my gosh, Karen, what's going on here? That is your strength. And I feel it, like I feel it in my heart. And it's like, it's almost like there's a release. Like, I know I get down on my shoulders and stuff. And then when you say Karen, and then all of a sudden, like, you are so right. Oh my gosh, where am I going with this? Oh my God, I can't believe that happened again.
Well, can I
And
ask you a quick question?
yes, please.
Do you notice a difference between if someone is just giving you external validation that's like just reassurance, but maybe they don't quite know you as well? And so they're touching on surface things like, oh, Karen, you've got this great education. You've been doing this job for so long. You know how to do this, right? That's all the surface stuff that actually the imposter syndrome is around. Versus when you and I talk and I'm pulling on my experience with you when I've seen you the most happy and jazzed about your doing. And that's what I try to remind you about. Do you feel those two things differently, like in your body, in your heart, and in your mind?
Yeah, because when you say it personally, the connection that you have heard me say is in my experiences and things, it creates that connection so I can go back to. But when they say about my education and my, all these other things, that it's like it's different because it's almost like those things that I still doubt about on whether or not they give me credentials, where your experience with me makes it much more powerful, right? I
Yeah.
think that's the whole point because I can see it.
I
Yeah.
guess what I'm asking is, do you notice if you feel it in your
Yeah,
body
I
more?
feel it. I feel it in my heart. Like it feels like it's gonna explode, like when it's ready. Seriously, it feels so like it's like a warmth there. It's really interesting. It's almost like it's ready to release. When you say it, it's like you're calling it out. It's like you're calling it out and it can be bigger because the doubt kind of like made it small, like smaller and
Hmm.
smaller. And then when you said, right, right, that's your strength, right? It's like, see, I'm right. It's telling my doubt. It's just seeing bigger. Does that make
But we're
sense?
talking what you're describing, because I was pretty sure I've seen it on your face.
Yeah.
And we call that resonance.
Mm,
And anyone listening to this, if you have ever had that experience of hearing a story that resonated with you, you
yes.
feel resonance in your body. Because the thing is, our heart recognizes our true capabilities, while fear whispers those doubts and makes us feel confused. And it creates a dissonance within us. So we're looking for that resonance. And wholehearted action means fully owning our expertise and experiences while standing in our vulnerability. I mean, that's
Now
that
that's
just
powerful. While standing in
yeah.
a
Wow.
vulnerability.
Because that fear of inadequacy has to be met with just a complete engagement rather than retreat. And when we do that, even if our knees are knocking together in fear, when we take the action because we're trying to align with that resonance in our heart, we are in that moment of courage and getting
Mm,
familiar with courage within us. So let me give you some quick examples of what wholehearted action in professional situations looks like. It might be speaking up at a meeting despite the fact that you're having those doubts about your own knowledge. Or maybe it's taking on a leadership role while you feel that you know it, but maybe you're on that leading edge, like, if I go into that zone, now I'm really not going to know what I'm doing. And it takes that courage to trust that the foundation you have built for yourself is enough to take you forward, to continue growing. Like I said, sharing work without over preparing, over what my dad calls polishing the cannonball,
Mm,
like, or polishing a turd. Like you just polish and
that's
polish and polish,
interesting.
but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
no benefit to that. Accepting praise and recognition fully, but not becoming dependent on that external validation. It's integrating recognition with an internal awareness that might be hidden behind the self doubt. And that takes practice over time. And it does help to acknowledge self doubt and share that openly. And we talk about this in the Cultivating Humility, because when we acknowledge self doubt, but then show that willingness to move forward, what people perceive is leadership,
Yeah.
because we all have doubts and most of us hesitate or avoid. So when you're open about, I'm not really sure about this, but we just need to move forward, it resonates for people as leadership. So when we bring our whole heart to moments of self-doubt and take action, whether it's sharing your ideas, asserting a decision, or claiming your expertise, leaning into courage and bringing your whole heart to moments of self-doubt, it really can be transformative.
So, how do you think we access courage when plagued with imposter syndrome?
We covered this a little bit in our first 4 episodes, but I think it's worth revisiting, and specifically the component on cultivating values, because values are courage enablers. Okay.
That makes sense.
And then why? Why? I remember when we talked about this before, you were like, I don't even know if I've really thought deeply about what my values are. And I hear that actually a lot because I use a method in therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. And one of the things you do is you identify your values so that when you're in that moment of struggle and you want to avoid or you want to do something that's not really going to serve you, you learn to sit in the struggle, and then you use your values to reorient and then have them motivate your action. It's like an anchor when you are in self-doubt, or it's like a North Star, because deeply held values, they're not just an idea. If you really think about it, it's an idea, but it's also something we feel emotionally. And that's why it's so powerful, because it's mind and emotion, and they provide clarity and purpose kind of beyond that moment, because values tend to be enduring over time. So, whatever your situation in the moment, whatever that insecurity is, when you anchor into your values that you've been living your whole life, that's the place you could go to stand in confidence. And then you can turn that dissonance into resonance, because when we are going against our values, if anyone's ever gone against your values, you'll know you feel sick inside, right? I don't care if you've ever done it, but your stomach gets in a knot. You just feel like hiding from the world, because your brain is like, this is not truth. This is not who you are. This is not right. We feel dissonance. And
Hmm.
that dissonance, what we can do is say, okay, if I'm avoiding, this doesn't feel like truth to me. Like I really should be speaking up. I know what the right answer is. And this is just my fear that's keeping me from sharing this knowledge. If you say have a value around growth or being a contributor, maybe that's about, like,
Mm.
I'm a helper server. So I have a value on that, and I'm holding on to information out of fear and trying to get past that fear moment. I can turn towards my value on helping and serving, because that'll be then in resonance, and that'll give me that boost to get through that moment of discomfort. Does that make sense to you?
Makes a lot of sense. I think that's where when I was able to switch it to serving by sharing my perspective as a way to serve for more informed decision making, it allowed me to share more because of that ability to tie it to the value of serving, right?
Yeah, it's really
It
powerful.
is very powerful, but I never connected to my values and then when I did, it was much more over the can I definitely see how that when you gave me the values and we were talking through it, that actually helped me overcome my imposter syndrome tendencies.
Yeah. And for those of you who are like, I never thought about, what do you mean by values? Just to give you a couple more, maybe you have a value, like we said, of service, authenticity, truth speaking. Maybe it's striving for excellence versus perfection, collaboration,
Action oriented.
taking action
Hmm.
versus being passive.
Hmm.
Maybe you have a value around being engaged versus
Hmm.
being an observer. Maybe your true
Yep.
value is to get in there because, again, imposter syndrome tends to happen around high achievers.
Hmm.
So there tends to be this drive that's already there. So if you're sitting back, you're already kind of going against that innate tendency.
That's what I
So,
did. So it's so
yeah.
funny.
And
It's
then
like
you
I
just like,
had the value, yet my imposter syndrome was overcoming it. It was almost like it was a cap to it or something.
yeah, it is a
Because I
cap.
want to fit in, so I want to belong. So that was part of the problem.
Yeah. Well, so what can we do? Like, how do we get there? And I would recommend doing a values identification, encourage mapping exercise. So I'm going to just walk through the steps quickly, but we will have it in the show notes so you can go back and take a look at it. But what you would do is first think about a time when you felt the most comfortable, the most alive, the most engaged, and the most purposeful. And then ask yourself, what was I doing when I felt most in integrity with myself? Like, was I contributing? Was I observing? Was I taking risks? Was I holding back? Look at those sorts of behavioral. How was I showing up when I felt most in integrity? Okay, a key question. How was I showing up? What would I stand up for even if I stood alone? That'll help you orient towards a deep underlying value. Like for me, if somebody who's vulnerable is being harmed or targeted, I have a strong value around defending the vulnerable. And I do this a lot as a therapist when I'm getting some pushback from insurance companies who are given a hard way to go to give authorization. Like I will beat insurance over the head with the law. Like I went and learned the law and I learned the regulations and I have no problems threatening them with filing grievances and citing the law until I beat them into complying with the law and regulations. Because when you work in mental health, I'm working with a population that is dealing with anxiety, depression, a vulnerable population. So that fires me up to
Yeah.
action. And then the other question, when have I felt most aligned with my true self? That's that connection to integrity. And then once you do these reflections, try to identify 3 to 5 core values that were present.
It makes a
And
lot of
then
sense.
the second part, then once you do that, okay, it's called courage mapping. And you can either visualize this if you're driving and listening, or if you are watching this, just do this as an exercise on paper. But draw 3 concentric circles on a page, kind of like a bullseye or a target. The inner circle is my core values from that first exercise. In the middle is current imposter fears. So you would feel that all around it. And then on the outer circle, what are wholehearted actions? What's the action you would take with your whole heart? So that might be publish that paper, volunteer to do the presentation. It might be let people know I'm on the spectrum, so that I'm not having to mask all the time. Whatever it is, like you figure out what is the action that you want to take, but you've been afraid to do it. And then what you do is from each fear in that middle circle, connect it to a relevant core value on the inner circle, and then see which of the actions it's might be related to that core value. So you're trying to connect a value to an action and you're squeezing the fear in the middle. An example might be I have a value around growing through challenges. My fear is I'm not qualified enough, say for whatever the assignment is. And so maybe the action is apply even if you aren't entirely certain about your strengths, because you will embrace it as a growth opportunity, because I'm going to link it to my value around growth. I have all this self-doubt in the middle, and then my action is just showing up despite the fear is just do it. Yeah, Karen, you did I think you did the just do it in our
Yeah,
last
yeah,
episode on
exactly.
courage, and we squeeze that fear in the middle. So that's what I would recommend as a practice. Like, what would you recommend that people do to practice or strengthen finding courage to overcome imposter syndrome?
I think it's what's really interesting is I found that courage isn't something that I have to create from scratch, right? Because I already have it. I'm realizing because there's a lot of small actions. We talked about this last time where I didn't realize how much the small actions are really courageous. And so the ability to do something with fear, I didn't realize I was doing. Remember, I was making fear like this big thing. And I think I equated to fearlessness until you brought up the difference between the two. Like I thought courageous was like fearlessness or facing that, the cancer diagnosis or, like stuff like that, right? So I never thought of the small things. Realizing that you already have been building the muscle, but the idea is to recognize that you're building these courage muscles by the small daily action. So even that small thing of it's like, you don't even think about, but speaking up in a meeting, even that speaking up in a meeting where you feel comfortable is great. So then you know how it feels like to speak up in a meeting, but it's even more powerful when you speak up in a meeting when you feel unsure and saying to an opportunity yes before you feel completely ready, because that's the courage part. And again, those moments, though small, are reinforcing my ability to move forward despite my doubt. And then the second one was developing support system, encourage accountability partners, is really trying to find a partner that actually could be in a meeting and say, I really want to speak up in this meeting. And, they might be able to encourage you or something there. Or it could be like you helping me because I'm just trying to do this courage. And you may ask, so what'd you do courageous today? Right. And it's just to put it in the forefront of my mind that I want to be courageous despite my imposter syndrome. And it's so interesting too about, I love the word reframe when there might be a word that's really heavy in your word, like not belonging was so heavy, right, for me. And when I started to switch the word to experimenting, it allowed me to kind of let go of not belonging and realizing that when you use experimenting or pioneering, something like that, instead of seeing my imposter syndrome as a sign that I don't belong, when I reframed it to those words about experimenting or pioneering, I felt like, okay, I'm trying to do something that's new, a new area to explore. I'm learning as I go and, I'll grow. It's okay. And then it just made me feel a little bit more freer to like accept that doubt and move on. So I think those are probably the three. So do you have any other things you want to share?
Well, just think about what you said. That resonated for me
Mm.
because one of my values is adventure.
Ah, yes,
And
yes. Yeah.
like
That's a good one.
some of our viewers know, I went on my first 5-week solo road trip through the Intermountain West during kind of off season. So I was camping out of my car in
Mm.
campsites that had no people in Montana, in grizzly territory,
With your dog, Sophie.
with my dog. And, it was, I think, over 3,000 miles. And my friends were like, oh my God, are you bringing a gun? And blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I don't think I would
But
have the courage to do it, but yeah,
yeah, and I did prepare. I did prepare
you
for a
did.
year for that trip. I had a lot of safety things. Karen was one of the people tracking me on my phone and on my satellite device. But there is that point where it's like you're just ready and you go, and I felt those butterflies. But because I
Mhm.
have a value on adventure, like you said,
Yeah,
pioneering, I have a value
yeah,
on adventure
yeah.
that I was able to push through that little bit of hesitancy and say, "You got this. Like, you're as prepared as you're going to be." And there was some moments where unexpected storms came in and I was supposed to be
Mm.
camping, and what do I do? I had fallen in a creek and my phone had fallen in the river.
Oh, I did not know that one.
Oh,
Sheesh.
yeah. I have to tell you that one too. But it was really tapping into, I just kept telling myself, "This is a grand adventure. Oh, you're gonna have great stories to tell." And my values around that just really gave me so much courage that it was interesting because I noticed that my friends who don't necessarily have adventure as a value, they just thought I was crazy. You know? So I think it's important for people to understand. Like, I definitely had moments of uncertainty. And so you don't need to be confident, like wait until you have 100% confidence to act bravely. Yeah, like 20/80, even 60/40. If you could do 60/40, and this, I can't remember if we talked about this, is about managing risk threshold. Maybe we'll do a whole episode on managing risk threshold. The more
Mm.
you manage your risk threshold, then the more I could be like 80/20. I can have 80% confidence and then just need courage to get through 20%. Actually, it's almost the other way. It's like I can tolerate more risk when I've mitigated, I've planned, I have contingency plans. And it's like, well, 60%. I could still do that because I've gotten enough, like, okay, if all goes crazy, I have a plan, I have contingency. So now I've increased my threshold for tolerating that uncertainty or not quite having all the confidence yet. Each courageous action you take, and what Karen was talking about, to even taking those little ones, it actually strengthens your capacity for being in your courage, for being brave. I actually look at it as when I have something scary, I like rub my hands. I'm like, ooh, I get to experience my courage today. I
You
literally say that to myself.
I know when you say, I'm like, "Really? Oh my gosh, I never even think about that. That's so
Oh,
cool."
I get to
It's
encounter the
excite
courage.
well, that makes sense with your adventure too.
Well, but it's in anything. It's really about a value. There's something really precious to me
Learning
about
or
courage. One of
Mm.
my favorite YouTubers, Eva Zubek, she's a travel vlogger, and her motto is "The world belongs to the brave." I
Oh,
even
I
bought
love
a
that.
sweatshirt that has that motto, and so I have such a strong value just around courage itself. So we've talked about you can get to courage through values, but if you have a value around courage itself, given a choice to be cautious or courageous, I will choose courage because it feels so strongly in my body, then that will definitely really help you in dealing with imposter syndrome. And then practicing it in those little ways that Karen said, that'll help get you there. And remember, when you have doubts, that's your friendly warning sign of, ooh, we're going outside the comfort zone. And remember, we talked about this, I think, in the imposter syndrome episodes, but I'll go over it again, that I learned from mountain biking. There's your comfort zone, then there's just outside your comfort zone, and then there's the stress zone. And what we want to do is constantly be stretching outside the comfort zone, but before you trigger the stress zone, because then you start going to sympathetic arousal and you start getting hijacked by your fight brain, and you're not learning anything, and growth doesn't happen there. Growth happens in that zone that's just outside the comfort zone. So those little steps, constantly looking for those opportunities. So maybe you're not publishing the entire paper, but maybe you show the draft to someone.
Mhm.
You're taking that, you're showing draft to a few people. Now you're starting to get comfortable with it. And so now you're like, okay, maybe I can show it to a professor now. And
Mhm.
now that feels more comfortable. What you're doing is you're slowly and incrementally stretching the comfort zone. And then it's like, okay, I'm ready to send it to a publisher. So you take these little steps.
And when it's interesting when you said the doubt is the evidence that you're pushing your boundaries. What I've learned is that doubt is that like that warning signal, but it's only a warning signal for you. And then you just have to notice it and then you just go. And so that helped me when I realized that it wasn't something like wasn't a blaring red like you just said when it becomes,
Right.
but it's the warning signal, like a light, like could be a yellow, it could be a flashing red, but it's not like a red stoplight. And that's I started to see it. And I think that started me to be able to move away from my imposter syndrome and also allow me to move more towards courage. I saw it as a warning signal.
Right. So when we talked before about expanding the comfort zone into sort of outside, but not into the stress zone,
Mhm.
I don't think we talked about that time, that those are those little moments of courage.
Yeah.
So you're actually exercising the courage muscle to do that. So we probably should have gone more deep into courage last year, but we're coming around to it again because it is so critical and so important. And so, what we're going to do is ask you folks to consider trying to practice this week. Choose one wholehearted action from your outer circle and try to connect it to your core values, and then actually make a plan. to take the action within the next week. And then consider, what support do I need? What does the small step look like? And then maybe get up that partner that Karen talked about and say, okay, I'm going to do this. Will you be my accountability partner? Because I want to start working on my courage. So that's my invitation to you this week.
I just love what we did today because I think it's so important because there's a lot of people like myself who had this imposter syndrome, and just tying it to back to courage is really, really critical. So before we sign off, guys, I just want to remind you, don't to forget to subscribe the button and turn on the notifications. Then you know when the next podcast is posted. And any comments, share regarding, that your call to action that Christina gave you and what happened there. So until next time, we'll see ya.
Don't forget, everybody, be kind, be brave, and be curious. And we'll see you next week.
Bye,
Bye.
y'all.